Throughout history, militaries across the world have invested vast sums of money and resources into developing new technologies and inventions to gain an edge over their enemies. Some of these inventions have been incredibly successful, but many others were nothing but unnecessary extravagances that were quickly discarded. And today, we will explore some of the most shocking examples of unnecessary military inventions throughout history that will leave you wondering how anyone thought this was a good idea. One of the most notorious examples of an unnecessary military invention was the homing pigeon-guided missile, developed by the United States during World War II. The idea was to use specially trained pigeons to guide missiles toward their targets, with the birds pecking at a screen to steer the weapon. While the concept may have seemed innovative at the time, the reality was that it was a complete failure. The birds were unable to distinguish between the images on the screen and simply pecked randomly, making the system completely useless. Another example of an unnecessary military invention was the bat bomb, also developed by the United States during World War II. The idea behind the bat bomb was to attach incendiary devices to bats and release them over enemy cities at night, with the hope that they would roost in the buildings and start fires. The plan was abandoned after a few unsuccessful tests, but not before the military had spent millions of dollars on the project. Moving forward in time, we come to the infamous Gay Bomb project, developed by the US military in the early 2000s. The idea behind the project was to develop a chemical mixture of psychedelics and pheromones that would make enemy soldiers sexually attracted to one another, thus distracting them from their mission. While the idea may have seemed amusing to some, it was quickly dismissed as unnecessary, since it did nothing to make straight men attracted to other male soldiers. It was also deemed unnecessary because the chemical weapons were considered unethical and ended up being nothing more than psychedelics mixed with smelly sweat, giving it the nickname of the halitosis bomb. Up next, we have the Tsar tank, also known as the Lebedenko tank. This massive vehicle was designed by the Russian military during World War I and was intended to be an all-terrain vehicle that could traverse any obstacle on the battlefield. However, the tank was so large and cumbersome that it was virtually impossible to use in combat. It was also incredibly expensive to produce and maintain, making it an unnecessary waste of resources. Perhaps one of the most bizarre examples of unnecessary military inventions was the anti-fart underwear developed by the British military in the early 2000s. The idea behind the invention was to create a pair of underwear that would filter out flatulence, thus preventing the embarrassing and potentially deadly release of gas in close-quarter combat situations. While the idea may have seemed absurd, the military reportedly spent over $100,000 on research and development. The next of our unnecessary military inventions was the American Davy Crocker nuclear weapon. This tiny nuclear device was designed to be fired from a recoilless rifle, basically a nuclear bomb in bullet form. However, it was unnecessarily dangerous and impractical, as it had a very short range and would have exposed soldiers to lethal levels of radiation. In the end, the weapon was never used in combat, and the program was eventually scrapped. These are just a few examples of the unnecessary military inventions that have been developed throughout history. While some of these inventions may have seemed like a good idea at the time, they ultimately proved to be an unnecessary waste of resources. On the other hand, many of these failures turned into scientific discoveries. As we continue to develop new technologies and weapons, it's important to remember that not all ideas are going to be good ideas. It's impossible to tell what ideas will lead to great results. So we have to go through a mountain of unnecessary fart deodorizing underwear to get to something that's practical.